Hello, Margie Bartles here with the Eastern Panhandle Board of Realtors Forms Committee.
And I'm Dodson with the Eastern Panhandle Board of Realtors Forms Committee, and we're here today to answer your questions.
Dawn's going to be the question asker, and I'm going to be the question answerer, at least to my ability. So here we go.
Here we go. So Margie, we're going to talk about the items to convey today in the walkthrough inspection. And I want to make sure that we're clear that this form is for two processes. First, it's for listing the items to convey, and then when you're ready to do your walkthrough, you take that same form and follow through to make sure all those items are in place, correct?
Indeed. One thing that I really want to call your attention to with the change this year is that there are no longer any no boxes. That was very confusing for agents, and we eliminated the no boxes, so that's a great thing. The other thing that we added was smart devices. We're hearing more and more from agents about smart devices and what stays and what doesn't stay. And the other thing that we eliminated is we used to give a list of what didn't stay, and what this form now says is items not listed do not convey. So we want to make sure that the consumer and the agent understand that if it's not on this list, it's not staying with the house.
Now, a question sometimes comes up. There may be a special light fixture in the kid's bedroom, or there could be a super duper chandelier from Great Aunt Sophie. And how do we address those, since it's going to be hanging there until closing or whatever? So we want to make sure.
Yeah, and I think that's a brokerage decision. I would always encourage an agent to get with their broker, see what the broker's opinion is. My opinion is always let the seller know they need to remove it before you mark it. I will tell you, back in the day, I lost a huge transaction over a chandelier from Belgium that the colonel said he was not leaving, and the buyer said they had to have, and it released. Nobody went to closing on that one. So,
Over a chandelier.
Over a chandelier.
So it's really important to make sure that when you're documenting the items, that you first of all get confirmation from the seller's agent, this does or does not, so that you have clarity when you do that important piece, which is the final walkthrough.
And the final walkthrough, the biggest change in the final walkthrough is the previous version. We talked about someone should write acceptable. In this version, it doesn't have to say that. It just says this property, is okay unless noted below. The reason that the final walkthrough is on the items to convey is we don't want agents to be transferring items that convey to a final walkthrough sheet. That's where most brokers and managers have seen lots of mistakes, and obviously those are not things that agents or brokerages want to buy. So it's very important that you use the items to convey and the final walkthrough.
Very good. I appreciate that, because this is an important element when you get to closing. And generally speaking, you take it to closing with you, and the attorney will make a copy for everybody so you have it for your records.
Very frankly, it's extremely important that you have the final walkthrough. My experience with litigation is that's a form that's always pulled. If there is any question about what condition of the property was and did the buyer really know the condition, the final walkthrough is really proof that the buyer knew what they were buying.
So one more thing about the items to convey that has come up a couple of times. There's a $3,000 refrigerator in the kitchen when the buyers walk through and write the contract. And the date of walkthrough, it's a different refrigerator. So essentially, it comes down to this is not the item that was agreed to in the contract. So what would we do in those circumstances?
If a seller is indicating that they're going to take any appliance that is actually in the property, my broker decision, and it's a brokerage decision, but my broker decision would be to say that item doesn't convey. And the reason is because that item doesn't convey. I will tell you, I've had instances where buyers and sellers have absolutely got into shouting matches over the fridge that was there was not the same fridge. And the buyer went back to the pictures in the MLS and said, here's a picture of the fridge. It's not what's in the house right now. That's never a comfortable place for an agent.
And always remember in my opinion, and I'm sure you would probably corroborate this, the agents shouldn't be arguing about these things in front of the clients. The agents need to figure out what their client wants or doesn't want to happen in this transaction, in this portion, and then they go aside and speak to their clients. Don't you think that's best practice?
I think that's absolutely appropriate. I think that items to convey is personal property, and very frankly, my opinion is it has no value. I get that everybody gets hung up on that refrigerator that's a $3,000 refrigerator, but it is not real estate.
Right.
So let's not make it real estate.
Thank you, Margie. So Margie, we're here again with the brokerage fee disbursement, and sometimes we have issues or concerns about how this form is to be properly used. And so we always address the chickens that each brokerage is going to receive. And if there's a circumstance where the agents, the licensees, agree to change what is in the MLS or what is in the listing agreement with the broker, that change needs to be acknowledged on the brokerage fee disbursement form, don't you think?
I think that's the best way to acknowledge it. I think you want your broker to make that choice, but I will tell you, my policy is that if there is a change from what we've all started out agreeing to what we'll go to closing with, we make the change on the brokerage fee disbursement form. And particularly in seller instances, normally this form is only signed by brokers and or agents. But if there is a change that affects a seller's net, I often will say have the seller also acknowledge the change, so that everyone is comfortable that the change has been made and all the parties agree.
Okay, very good. I appreciate that. And then we always have to address if there's any selling bonus, which sometimes you get from builders. Sometimes you get that from builders, and that should be disclosed in this also. And then the deposit, how much the deposit is and who's holding it. And I know we're moving a lot towards having the closing attorney hold the funds.
That's right.
And so we just need to make sure that we have that. And as a caveat, if the purchaser is sending the funds directly to a closing attorney, then I think it's the responsibility of the buyer's representative to make sure that they have a copy of it, because as I understand it, the deposit fully ratifies the sales agreement.
Well, it depends on what attorney you talk to, and they're split about 50-50. But the reality is the agent's responsibility through the West Virginia Real Estate Commission license law is to treat that EMD as money, because it is, whether the brokerage holds it or whether an attorney holds it. And so it's really important that all the parties know where's the money and has it been paid. Those of us who've practiced a long time, it's extremely disconcerting to open a file and see a check in it. And I would be a fibber if I said, well, I've never opened a file and seen an EMD check in it. Well, that would not be right. But, I never want to do that as an agent or a broker, because, that check's money and it's a part of the contract. Some attorneys think that ratification happens with the EMD. Some attorneys think it doesn't. The reality is the only way you'll ever find out is from a judge, and you don't want to be there.
And you don't want to be there, yes. And always remember to consult your broker on where and how that EMD is recognized, and whether the broker feels that is making the contract fully ratified or not.
And I would also suggest one of the early pitfalls that I fell into with an EMD was a buyer that had a rejection letter. And I indicated to the buyer that they would get their money back, and the seller wouldn't sign the release. So the reality is that release is released from a seller and a buyer. Agent really has very little to do with it.
Yeah.
So you just always want to say to the buyer as they make the EMD, this is proof that you will perform, but please understand the seller makes any decisions about EMD after the fact.
Very good. So there's two more places here on the broker's fee disbursement that may be used by a licensee. that would address any additional charges to either the seller or the purchaser. And so what would some of those charges be?
There are companies that charge transaction fees. There are companies that charge document preparation fees. You know, it would be beholden to any agent if there's an extra fee besides the chickens that the brokerage charges, that it be on this form so that the parties understand here's what's paid, here's who pays it, and they're fully aware of that also.
Right.
The other thing that I would tell you about the brokerage disbursement fee, this is not an actual part of a ratified contract.
Right.
It's a voluntary form that we ask EPBR members to use, but ratification happens between a seller and a buyer. And this doesn't actually have a seller or buyer blank for them to sign.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate that, Margie. And remember, always consult your broker before you make any decisions on documents.
Absolutely, bro. if I'm not your broker and Dawn's not your manager, you need to consult the folks who are. Take care.
Thanks.